Welcome back, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of Coaching in Higher Education, the go-to podcast for leadership coaches at colleges and universities. As always, I'm your host, Tim Jansa, a certified leadership and organizational development coach and higher education professional of close to 20 years. I'm joined today by Stéfane Cahill Farella, who's a Senior Associate Director of Organizational Effectiveness at Boston College. What's really exciting about today's conversation is that he and I will be continuing a discussion about the logistics and strategic considerations of running a professional leadership development coaching program, and this time from the institutional perspective. So all you coaches out there watching and listening, you might be particularly interested in this episode. So let's get started and see what it takes to run a successful and fully strategically integrated coaching program on campus. Welcome to the program, Steph. It's really great to have you on the show.
Tim, good to see you again. It's an honor to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. So I always like to do a little bit of research before an episode. So one thing that I found is the 2025 Higher Education Employee Retention Survey by the famous or infamous College and University Professional Association for Human Resources. And that report found that even though the overall likelihood of staff and faculty leaving our institution has somewhat declined in recent years, still 1 of 4 employees is likely looking for another job within the next year. So the trend of this high staff and faculty attrition that we've seen since the pandemic seems to continue. Is this something the Employee Development Division at Boston College is actively addressing and thinking about? Or how would you describe the focus of the initiatives that you're part of and that you lead, especially those that might be of interest to the coaches watching and listening to this program?
Sure. Thanks for the opening salvo. We are very excited about the trends lately in terms of retention. As you know, a few years ago, the labor market was very tight, meaning that candidates had lots of options. And because of that, there was turnover. And I think all institutions saw that. Even though we pride ourselves on being a great place to work with a lot of value for employees, it's hard to compete when folks can go somewhere else real quickly and make a lot more money, as people were jumping for money for salary. And so what we've seen now is that activity has really settled down and our turnover has regulated what we would normally expect on a regular year, sort of pre-pandemic. Mm-hmm. I would say one thing that we do, employee development, is the department I work in. It's been around for about 25 years. And that name is a little misleading because we do more than just employee development, but we're going to talk about that. We really pride ourselves on the culture here. It's a Jesuit Catholic institution, as you know. And one of the phrases that Jesuit Catholic School use is called Cura Personalis, which in Latin means care of the person. And I think that's really what our value add is here, that when people experience working in this culture, they feel like they're cared for, they're welcomed, right? They have a sense of the mission. They're about something bigger than themselves. That's what Jesuit Catholic education calls people to.
I know that some of our viewers and listeners might think, well, this is a private Jesuit institution, and so how is what we're talking about transferable to my big, land grant R1 institution? But one of the things that I was so impressed by, and I mentioned this to you a little while ago, is that you shared a document with me before our today's session. And that document truly convinced me that I think the program that you're running could really be an exemplar even for larger institutions. Would you mind telling us a little bit about this document? And maybe I can share with you a little bit afterward what my takeaways are. But I would just love to hear what it's about, how it serves you, how it serves your programs, and maybe what some of our audience can learn from that.
Sure, happy to. So you're referring to what we refer to as our foundational documents for our signature leadership development program, which we call ILDP, Ignatian Leadership Development Program. It's kind of a boring name. You know what happened we were doing this during COVID, trying to put it together, and we needed a placeholder, like that program. I said, well, just call it ILDP. And then nobody ever came up with a better name. So that's what we have, ILDP. So what we needed to do in order to engage our stakeholders, potential participants, and nominators, senior leaders who would nominate other people, and facilitators and coaches, we needed to have a document that explained what the program was all about. And the key question that we were answering was, how is a program like this distinctly different at Boston College than it is at, say, a secular institution or one of our other peer institutions? And so that caused us to wrestle with that question of mission and our identity. As our president refers to it, as our distinctiveness, not our uniqueness, right? And so those discussions gave rise to the preliminary foundational document that has now been iterated over the years. We're in our 4th cohort this year, Tim. And so here are the principles. The first is the lens of Ignatian leadership. How is leadership different, informed by the 500-year-old tradition of St. Ignatius, who gave rise to the Jesuits? What does that mean? How does Ignatian spirituality inform leadership, right? Could you tell the difference between somebody who leads in an Ignatian way and somebody who just leads in a secular way, right? So that was the first thing. Second thing was what we call inclusive leadership. So taking the best of what we know about how we honor and manage differences and commonalities and bring that together, thinking about fair treatment and equity and diversity, right? Inclusive leadership, so important in a world that's getting smaller and smaller, where people come up against folks who are different. So that's the second principle. And the third principle is what I like to call leadership science, or what we teach in our MBA program. So if you open up Harvard Business Review and you look at the latest research, what does research say about the best way to lead? So we're trying to weave those three things together in the way that we teach everything and the way that we discuss everything. So that's the main thing in the document. Another thing that the document lays out is the structure, obviously, of the program. And in our design team, we basically came up with 4 modules. And I think most leadership programs I've looked at have something like this. The first module is called Journey to Self. And that word to, is very specific, because as some people say, especially in spiritual circles, the journey from head to heart might be, in some cases, the hardest journey somebody has to make, the journey to self-knowledge. So, and a great leader needs to start with who they are. What are their values? What are they trying to do in the world? What are they trying to manifest? Right? So many people try to lead and don't have a good sense of who they are. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to follow somebody unless they know what they're doing and what they're about, and they're a person of high character. So there's a unit on that. The second module is Journey with Others. So yes, no matter what we do, whether we're in software development or we're in student services, we need to make a journey with other people. Third, we focus on what we call focus on results, which maybe not the best name, but the idea is if the first module was thinking about self and the second module was thinking about others, the third is thinking about the problem or the opportunity as an object, okay? And then we also talk about design thinking as a solution to coming up with solutions for organizational problems. This year, we added a component called action learning, where every group has a project. All right, so there's focus on results. And then the fourth one is what we call organizational leadership, or basically theory around organizations. What is vision, mission? What's culture? What's strategy? How do you build a team? Right? How do you work with a systems thinking lens, particularly around issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion? So the document lays all of that out. It also lays out learning outcomes, right? What we're specifically trying to teach. And then it also lays out our philosophy around some other components. Then there's also a whole section on coaching and what we do for coaching. And I'm happy to talk about those details, but it lays out the expectations around coaching. It lays out what assessments people are going to take. It talks about the schedule, which basically we try to have our coaches meet with our participants in between sessions. So the rhythm is participants go to a session and then they have a coaching session. They go to a group workshop, then they go to a coaching session. That's sort of the rhythm. And trying to allow flexibility. So the document really lays all of this out in a way that hopefully doesn't leave that many questions.
And this is, I think, where the brilliance lies of this document. Because I mean, I've talked to a lot of folks about different leadership development programs, and what I saw in your document, for me, really encapsulates, I think, the what institutions should be doing to help, number one, socialize and fully integrate their leadership development and coaching program, but also help build the capacity amongst the participants to really understand how to maximize their impact and their experience, their participation in this program. So I think, there's a couple of really important takeaways. Number one, for coaches who want to be as external coaches who want to come into an institution to be supporting leadership development, you have to understand the institutional context. Yours is very specific. Again, your mission is very clear. It's something that many other institutions don't necessarily have to that extent, or at least they might struggle with. So leadership is contextual, and so of course is then the coaching and the support services we as coaches have to provide. On the institutional side, I think where other institutions can really learn from you is to have this very clear understanding of what you're trying to accomplish with this. What are you trying your leaders to become, or what do you want your leaders to become? What behaviors, attitudes, dispositions do you want them to adopt and to make their own? I've seen some programs that have done this extremely well. Others kind of like, well, we're developing leaders somehow, but when I really dig in and say, well, what's the purpose? What are you envisioning your leaders to be? It's like they don't really know. So this is something very important. And another thing here that I think comes in is there might be an opportunity sometimes for coaches who might be working with an institution that does not have a super clear understanding of where their leadership development needs to go. So maybe they can support that institution in devising and finding out those things. So these are just a couple of things that were going through my mind. Steph, I'm wondering, what were there particular challenges that you and your team were trying to address with this document? Was there something that was just kind of irking you that triggered it and helped you over time refine and add on to this document?
Sure. I mean, there's been challenges with setting up the coaching program. I mean, if that's what you're intimating there. I mean, the document itself hasn't been that difficult. I think a lot of people are impressed by looking at that, both the foundational documents and then also this coaching guide for participants that we created this year. That actually was a new thing we did, because that speaks to the first challenge, is that many participants in the program have never had a coach before, so they don't know what coaching is. And we do an orientation, of course, at the beginning of the program where I explain a little bit about coaching to try to get them to understand. I actually use something I learned in David Rock's book, Quiet Leadership, I think I saw many years ago, where he talks about the difference between consulting and coaching. He says, consulting is you and I are looking at this water bottle and you're asking me, what should I do with this water bottle? And, you're paying me a lot of money because I have experience with this water bottle. And so I tell you what to do with this water bottle. You pay me and I leave. I don't know if you actually do what I told you with this, but that's consulting. Coaching, to oversimplify. I'm not bashing consultants, right? They do great work, but they get hired for an expertise in the thing, is what I'm saying. Coaching is different. You're looking at the water bottle, and I'm looking at you looking at the water bottle. I'm asking you questions about, well, how many of these water bottles have you ever come across before? And what are the obstacles in working with this water bottle? What else would you like to do? So I go through some shtick like that. And in the beginning, I thought that would have been enough, but no. People get into it and they don't understand what the modality of coaching is. And so that's been a struggle, which is why we created this second document around what coaching is, to really drill that home, and also to emphasize with our coaching cohort, hey, you have to educate people on how to use you, because we're spending money for you to be a coach in this organization, and they're getting a great benefit. I don't want them just showing up and asking you for advice or not being prepared, or if they don't understand the modality. So one of the challenges has been helping them understand what coaching is. Another challenge has been, I've noticed over the years, because it's a cohort experience, a lot of them, they're checking in with their colleagues to see what's going on in their coaching sessions, because some of them have the same coach, but some have different coaches. We have 16 participants and we might have 9 coaches working in the system, right? And I noticed that some of the participants got kind of bothered that other of their colleagues were at a different place in the coaching than they were. And so there was sort of this need to, in some ways, to create a uniform process or sort of flow, but not to create uniform coaching, because of course coaching is very customized. And as a coach myself, I want to make sure that I preserve that flexibility for coach and client to work how they need to. But I also have to make sure that they get to an endpoint. There's certain things like they all got to do a 360. They all have to have a development plan, right? They should have a wrap up. Session. They should have a 3-way meeting with the supervisor, at least one, if not 2. There's certain things that they have to do that are the same, right? But they could do them at a different pace, and they can do them in the way that they, as coach, with their style. Some coaches give additional assessments on their own dime if they want, because that's what they do. So that was something we had to learn, and also educate the participants on that. Hey, don't look over at what Jane's doing and say, how come I'm not getting that? Because that's customized, right? So that's been a challenge. Another is the culture. I think this is the question I get most from my leadership, which is, how do you know that coach can coach in the culture? And I say, well, I understand that question. Coaches work in a lot of different organizations. So what I'm really looking at is the coach's ability to learn the culture quickly. And as I say to my leadership, it's not that they have to be experts on the culture, but they have to help their clients by asking questions that help the client operate within the culture. And one of the questions that we got early in this design of the program, which you were talking about a little bit earlier, what's the overall purpose of this? What are you trying to do? In the design meetings, we had some focus groups, and somebody said, well, are you designing this program to help people navigate the culture or to change it? I thought that was a brilliant question. And I said, both. But depending on who you ask. Right? Because if you already think you have a great culture, why would you need to change it? Well, there's always something to improve, right? But that is very important to our leadership, which is to preserve what is distinctive and good about our culture. So I would say our program is helping people to navigate what exists and also to learn how to make change within it, because that is not an easy thing to do in our universe. So dealing with culture has been a challenge. And then there's, like logistical things too, Tim, like we had to make a decision about what 360 to use. So I needed to mandate that any coach who participated in the system got certified in that 360. If you weren't certified in that, I couldn't think about you as a coach in the program. I did make that palatable for coaches. I said, look, what we can do, I can talk about our matching system if you want, right? But we have a system of matching coach to participant where I get coaches to record a video and share a bio. And then I make those available to the participants. And I ask them to give us a few choices on who they would like to work with. And then based on my knowledge of the coaches and what I think the participants might need, then we try to match them up for a chemistry check.
One question I wanted to ask you is like how being a certified coach yourself really contributes to you being able to lead and run these programs. And you pretty much already answered that question, because I think it's because you created a process and a structure that is very competent in terms of it addresses the essentials of what coaching is about, how it should work, how you onboard, how you do the chemistry meeting, how you give the coaches the freedom to still work with their client on an individual basis, yet maintain an overall structure. So I really appreciate you bringing that in. And this idea of competence, I always say, especially in higher education, it's nice for coaches to be what I call competent outsiders if you bring outside coaches in, because you still, as a coach, need to understand the higher ed world so you can help your clients navigate it, because it's such a nonsensical world in many ways. Steph, I wanted to kind of maybe take a little twist, a little side road here. One thing that I get asked about a lot of times, especially by new coaches, is they're really intimidated by this RFP process. So a lot of times, they always say, well, how do I get started? I said, well, there's different ways of doing it, but sometimes institutions, a lot of times they put RFPs out there, these requests for proposals, and then you need to submit a proposal, and hopefully, you go through the selection process, you will be selected. And I know that you went through one not too long ago. And I'm wondering, would you mind sharing just a tiny little bit about, kind of what went into the process, what some thoughts were, and how you ended up selecting providers?
Sure, absolutely. Happy to. And let me just say that when we selected coaches for ILDP many years ago, and I continue to recruit coaches along the way, I don't use a formal process there. It's more of a networking approach. And I would say that since I've been here 10 years, I've been asked occasionally to recommend coaches. So even there, I haven't always done an RFP. Not all coaching at the university flows through me. I actually think this is something that we should think about doing more of, because it's my way of thinking better if we require all coaching to come through us, because we can standardize, we can negotiate contracts, I can help out in terms of accountability, right? As opposed to if it just happens in the unit, then they're on their own with coaching, and they may not have an expertise in it. So normally it's a networking thing. But recently, I was talking to a senior manager in one of our units, and they told me that they're really interested in bringing in coaching for maybe 5 or 6 of their mid-level managers. So it was clearly a program. It wasn't how it often appears, which is, hey, I have one person that I think could benefit from coaching. This was a group of people, and they were really interested in various providers. And they had said, like, I'm interested in who you typically use for your leadership development program, or who you know. And I said to her, I said, well, I have a network of coaches, obviously, that I have trust with. I said, but this might be a good time for a request for proposal, right? Because you're explaining the needs. You have mid-level managers who are good employees, but most of them are green in terms of managing. You all need them to have similar skills. You want to kind of bring them along in a similar fashion at the same time, which is of strategic importance right now. This happens to be our advancement division fundraiser, and we're going through a capital campaign right now too, right? So it's part of a strategic process that's timely. So I said, what might be good is to just throw those needs together in a document. And I'll certainly put that out to my network of coaches, but I can expand that as well, because, I only know who I know. And I also, as a coach, know I have my own biases. And so I don't want my own biases to affect the selection of coach for needs that, I may not fully comprehend or understand, right? Based on just a conversation with the manager. So together we worked on a document that laid out the purpose of the coaching. We set a timeline and, asked for certain requirements, what you would see in an RFP, right? Credentialing, what your approach might be, what your pricing is on a per person and a total basis, right? And, it's amazing with an RFP process like that, because as I was saying earlier, when you have to commit something to paper, right, you have to think it through. And we got a tremendously diverse set of proposals, and interestingly with coaching, because it's still an industry that I would say it's still a nascent industry, relative to other industries, you see wide variety of pricing. I don't know if you've ever done a project on your house, you have contractors come in, usually there's like one low, one medium, one high. Like I would say yes times two, there's low and high, right? Because coaching is, for a lot of people, even though we have ICF and we have certain standards, it's still very subjective. What is coaching? And still misunderstood by a lot of people. So yeah, I mean, we're still learning about how to do that, but I think it's very simply trying to get the needs of the group on paper and then pushing it out there and then sorting through.
Well, I appreciate you walking us through this. It's so individualized, though, isn't it? But I mean, one of the things that I can imagine probably made the process a little bit easier is because, again, you have a very mission and values-driven organization. So it's somewhat, I would say, easier, a little more straightforward to integrate any kind of leadership development coaching program directly with the vision and the mission of the institutions, because you already have foundational documents, that spell all this out. So, Steph, to wrap things up, what would you say makes a successful leadership development and coaching program from your internal perspective on campus? What works? Maybe where there's some challenges. What would you like to share?
I think the first thing from an institutional standpoint is got to keep iterating that thing. Keep working at it. So often people develop a program and then that investment is done and it's like, let's just run that. Let's run that because we don't have to use any more brain power on it. That's not how I think about it. As I talk to professors here at the university who teach new classes, they say, you really need 3 years or something before you know what you have. Because you design something on paper. I mentioned we had a design team, right? But then you're in practice and you have to get that feedback and then have that influence your own system and your own way of thinking. We made a lot of changes to it. So I think the first thing is that understanding that, if you're going to create something like this, you have to be incredibly flexible. You have to be decisive. We're going to do this, but then you also have to be flexible and willing to keep iterating. We've changed quite a bit, we canceled some programs, we added some new ones or units inside the program, changed some policies. You learn a lot and you have to adapt as you go. The second thing, I think probably the most important thing is you have to select motivated learners. This is a year-long program. As you said, it's an investment. The biggest investment is the coaching. To get coaches for 16 people for a full year each, that's a big investment of money. That's the biggest line item in the budget. And I had to go to my vice president and I had to say what the value of that was. Because some programs have like group coaching, one coach for 5 or 6 people. We have a coach per person. Now that's a big deal. So I don't want to spend that money and invest in you if you're not committed. Now, one thing we do is we sit down with each person for an hour before they get selected to ask them questions to determine if they're going to be motivated learners or not, or they're just doing this because this is a privilege and they were nominated. We have to help people remember that it's a long commitment for them, but motivated learners is incredibly important, and if you have that, you have everything, because your dialogue is rich. The way that people help each other learn is robust. They're invested with their coach. They get more out of it. So more eventually gets returned to the organization, you know. And that brings me to my next point, which is, and this is something we still are working on, excuse me, it's getting supervisor support. So the support of the people in the orbit of the participant is really important. Now, this is an organizational intervention.
Yeah.
This is not just an intervention for 16 people, see? This is an intervention for the whole organization, because all those folks who are filling out that 360, hopefully, they're also reflecting on their own leadership practice as they're answering these questions about their colleague who's going through the program. And the supervisors, you know, we asked them to do a 360, and we also asked them to be in a three-way meeting with their participant and the coach. And I've had some coaches who were new to the three-way meeting concept, and I said, yeah, the objective in that is to really allow that supervisor in front of their direct report to talk about the ways in which they would like to see that person grow and how they're going to support them in that organizational context. You know, they have to be a part of it. If a person grows but it's not supported by the leader, right, that's going to be a frustration for this person who just, you know, participated in this massively intensive program for a year. So we need supervisors to increasingly become more involved. And we're trying to create better systems so they can be, for example, to force a conversation between the participant and supervisor at the end of the year. We assume it's happening, but I know it's not all the time. To talk about, what did you get out of this? And what's going to be different now that you're leading here? And how are you going to contribute to the organization in a different way? The supervisor needs to be asking those questions, you know? So we need that, not only that commitment, that motivation from the participant, but also the people around them to support that growth, right? So those are key things. And, you know, I would say, just in closing, you need support from the highest leadership. You know, obviously, with a budget to do this, we have support at the highest level at in the president's office, right? The president of our university thinks very highly of our program, believes that it's a game changer. He presents in it himself, right? So senior leadership is integrated into the delivery of the program as well. And so that's incredibly important to have that, because some people may still see leadership development as, well, you're not doing your job, you're off doing that thing, versus no, what we're doing is inculcating in a deeper way a sense of mission, right? Developing skills, right? And returning that investment to the university, right? So we cannot think about it as like an expense, right? As overhead or that thing, a distraction. You know, it's a keen investment of time. So those are some of the factors that come to mind.
I love that, Steph. This was just a wonderful summary, and I think this is something that some listeners who might be working on developing similar or leading or running similar programs at institutions can really learn from. It really truly takes a village, doesn't it? So it's not one-offs. This is one thing that just irks me to no end. A lot of times, those leadership programs, yeah, let's have a workshop for a couple of hours and then go and be great leaders. It just doesn't work like that. I mean, this has to be fully integrated, has to be supported by top leadership. And I wanted to also just highlight what you said at the very beginning, and that is this aspect of iteration. That just because a program exists doesn't mean that this is the end of it. It's just the beginning. You have to grow with it. People change, people's needs change, the institutional context, the global context, educational context in the country changes, all these things. And with it, these programs have to change. And this speaks very, very much to my own attitude as an agilist, you know. And agile, one of the things that is foundational is iteration. You always you come up with a product, but then you constantly try to improve it and make it better by listening to the people who are actually most affected by it. I really appreciate your taking the time out of your busy schedule to share all this wisdom, this experience with us. There's been so much learning that I've had, and that I believe that our viewers and listeners will have had as well. So thank you again for making time.
My pleasure. And if you or any of your listeners want to talk more about it, I'm happy to share what we've created and our thinking on it. Would love to see if we can help other schools to save a few brain cells in thinking about all this, to learn from maybe some of the things we've done. That would be my pleasure. So thank you for the opportunity. It's been great to be with you.
And thank you all so much for watching and listening. As always, if you enjoyed today's episode, please click the like button and subscribe to this channel. Your support means a lot. If you're interested in more information on this episode, our guest, and today's topic, please visit our companion website, higheredcoaching.us or leadershipimagined.com/podcast. There, you can also find my previous conversation with James Walton on running a coaching program on the provider side. See you next time, and keep making a difference, one client and one conversation at a time. See you soon.